the Kremlin is now forced to buy fuel from Belarus, when not long ago it called itself as an energy superpower. How can we explain that?
Well,
that's the part of the same chain,
right? The success of the Ukrainian military. This is an indication of the success of the campaign. And this, if Ukraine has sufficient drones and can keep this campaign up in a steady way, as I said, to hit the refineries at the faster than the rate that they can be repaired, it will do very significant damage. And Russia, from being an energy superpower, will both internally start to have energy problems, which you've mentioned they do have. But importantly, I'm looking forward to also, Mr. Trump has not backed. It's interesting, during this peace negotiating process that's supposed to take a couple weeks until supposedly we'll see if Putin meets Mr. Zelensky, he has not backed off on the secondary tariffs, the secondary sanctions in the form of very high tariffs, 50% tariffs, 25% of which is due to, on India I'm talking about, 25% of which is due to India continuing to buy Russian oil. He has not backed off on that. His advisors, Mr. Navarro, wrote a very rather fiery op-ed in the Financial Times against the Indians for persisting in this, and his also his minister, his cabinet minister, Mr. Besant, has also done the same thing in interviews. So they haven't backed off on that. And India, the Indian firms are looking at other places to buy oil. So the Americans have not backed off during this period of negotiations or supposed negotiations, have not backed off on that pressure to kill Russian exports. So I'm looking forward to, I hope, this attack on the Druzhba pipeline and going after Ust-Luga indicates the beginning of a campaign also, not only against refineries inside Russia, but the export capacity in these ports.
But also, Mr. O'Donnell, if Russian economy is cracking, we don't see any much of political crisis in the Kremlin, because while the West is waiting for for the huge sanctions against Russia that Trump is promising to impose every week, it seems like just Russia is using this time to strengthen its military production through China, through Iran, and other countries.
Okay. Well, my guess is that a country like Russia, which is an authoritarian regime where even big firms are essentially linked with the state firms, they don't collapse in the same way that a democracy would if it had these economic problems. In a democracy, they depend very much on the consumer's approval to buy products, and consumers might have citizens have the right to protest and so forth. None of that exists in Russia. So it's a very statist regime. And, money that normally goes for bread and butter, but also social services in Russia, is being diverted to the war efforts. And it's very difficult for the citizens to protest if they're upset about this, or to protest about a war where so many tens of thousands of soldiers are killed every month. So my guess is the war would get very difficult for the Kremlin to pursue because it gets more and more expensive and they have to make difficult choices and so forth. But it might not collapse in the same way it would in perhaps in a democracy where the people could protest. But it definitely undermines their capacity. If they don't have enough oil for the front, to be mobile, that's a significant hit. If they don't have enough oil to produce agriculture, which nowadays is after energy, the export of agricultural products, wheat especially, is a big contribution to the Russian budget. All these things make it more difficult. So I don't want to say that one front is like the key battle and that's the end of the war. It's like in the war itself. Every battle makes a contribution to eventually the collapse of the enemy's capacity.
Yeah. At the beginning of a full-scale invasion, Ukrainians were so waiting for Russians to go on the protest because for what they have done to Ukraine, and what have done to Mariupol, and we were hoping they're gonna go to protest because of this war. Then in 2023, we were waiting for them to protest because of the inner problems in Russia. And now, by watching what's happening there, I don't really believe that ever protest could happen in Russia.
Well, under the Tsar, there was a revolution. So it's not impossible that under an authoritarian regime. However, look, I grew up in a democracy in the United States, and we had a terrible war in Vietnam that the United States had lost something like 5 years before they withdrew. But even in a democracy, they insisted on pursuing that war and terrible mass bombings of the country, even though they had no hope of winning it. And it took years for protests to build up in the United States. The fact that that soldiers die in a war, it's very difficult, on the one hand, sometimes for the families to admit to themselves that they died for the wrong cause, they died for an imperialist cause. And it takes a period of time. So I would say that even in a democracy, the state can do very strong propaganda. I talked to a fellow who just returned from Russia visiting some sick relatives, and there's so many lies in the media. People assume they lie. He said, but they can't imagine how everything is basically a lie, and so they end up actually believing a certain part of it. And it's very difficult. They can't even get a VPN to listen to any normal news broadcasts outside the country. It's very, very difficult. Only the opposition can sell some VPNs on the black market that work for a little bit of time to get some news. So I would not expect very quickly this to develop in Russia. It's possible that it will at some point if Russia starts losing the war in an obvious way. But it's up to the Ukrainians to win the war, unfortunately, and their allies to help them at this point.
This is horrible, to be honest. They are living in a bubble of such a lie. Yes. They are so unreversibly brainwashed. Yeah. So it's
very difficult. Yeah.
Yeah, unbelievable.
I'm here in Germany right now, and people tell me stories of what it was like during the war, or what it was like in Eastern Germany before the wall fell down. And it was a similar thing. It took people a period of time, of years, to realize what had been going on historically outside.
Yes. Mr. O'Donnell, winter is coming. Could Russia plan a major offensive against Ukraine before winter, and can the West prevent it?
Yeah. Well, this is not my area of expertise, military. There's a handful of people I listen to they really are experts. Russia has had this summer offensive, and it's interesting. If you look at what Russia has gained since 2022, when the full-scale invasion began, as compared to what it had gained since 2014 in the initial invasion, it's actually a small percentage more for all the tens of thousands that die every month. So they're not making very great progress. There's always the possibility that there's a breakthrough someplace and a significant gain someplace. But Ukraine has successfully been basically holding back the Russians even during this offensive. So it's cost the Russians a lot. It would, to me, be unusual after this long period of attempted offensives that they're capable to launch something else at the beginning of winter. But as I say, I'm not the military expert.
Yeah. And the final question, to sum up all these successful Ukrainian attacks inside of Russia. So the key question, can Ukrainian strategy of energy strikes realistically force Putin to the negotiation table?
Right. Well, this is a war of, in a sense, this is also a war of attrition. It's a war of statistics. Russia is a huge country with a huge refining capacity and huge oil producing capacity. So Ukraine, they tried this a couple years ago, and it hurt Russia, but it wasn't sufficient to really undermine the oil sector or the energy sector. Now Ukraine can produce more drones, and they're drones that are more effective. So this is the war. Can Russia repair these things faster than they can be destroyed by Ukraine? And we won't know the answer to that question, I would say, for some weeks or maybe even some months. But I think there's a much better possibility of it right now than there was a couple years ago. That was a learning process. And if that happens, undermining the oil sector inside the country would be devastating to the capacity to pursue war. Anybody who knows the history of World War II, World War I knows, whether in the Pacific or in Europe, knows how critical the availability of lots of cheap oil to one side or the other was to pursue the war. And that's the same thing in Ukraine. So Ukraine is doing the right thing by going after this, and hopefully they'll be successful. And I hope, because the Americans apparently want to stop the export of Russian oil now, which is a change in their policy. That's why they're going after India for buying Russian oil. I hope that there's no impediments anymore to Ukraine going after and smashing the 3 westward-facing oil export terminals that we know they can reach.
Yeah, right. Well, that gives me some hope, Mr. O'Donnell. Thank you. Thank you again for your time, for your brilliant answers.
Thank you very much, Natalie.
Yeah, and I hope to see you again.
Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава!